Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the November 18th, 2015 meeting of the Frederick County Planning Commission. Would you join us in a moment of silence, please? Thank you. We have no changes to the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move for adoption.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. We do have a set of minutes for us.
Madam Chair, I move for adoption of the October 21st minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. This is time for our committee reports, and I believe comprehensive plans met this week, and so
The committee did meet
that's right.
last week. I was not in attendance, but I don't know if Mr. Ruddy would like to give a quick overview of the discussion.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I apologize. I
That's
knew-
okay.
Comprehensive Plans Committee met and used the meeting as an opportunity for the citizens who were working on the review of the rural areas, urban areas chapters of the comprehensive plan, the residential development, business development chapters, to get together and continue their work to update each of those particular chapters. So we had this additional discussion and let you recommend review of those sections.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're pleased to see Dr. Feo is back with us from the city of Winchester. Do you have a report
you.
for us?
Madam Chairman, yes. Brief report, brief meeting yesterday. There was a public hearing at which time the committee forwarded a recommendation to council for approval of a conditional use for a Verizon wireless tower to be constructed at 385 Battle Drive. We also, again, discussed and resolved an ordinance to rezone 55.8 acres of land, which encompasses 110 particles along Millwood Avenue, which will in the future be included and termed the Millwood Avenue Carter Enhancement District.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mr. Hess from the Board of Supervisors.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I hope you'll bear with me this morning. We had a lot of Planning Commission items on the last Board of Supervisors meeting agenda, including 7 public hearings were scheduled. First was a resumption of the public hearing for rezoning 09-15 Artillery Business Center, which had been continued from the October 28th board meeting. Last week, the applicant requested that a decision be postponed. The board agreed to the postponement and rescheduled the public hearing for our December 9th meeting. Next, we held a public hearing on a conditional use permit, number 03-15, for the sale of sheds on property located along Fairfax Pike. There were no public comments, and the CUP was unanimously approved. Then there was a public hearing on rezoning 07-15 for 20 acres on Woodbine Road from RA to M2 with proffers. One citizen spoke in opposition regarding allowed uses under M2 and insufficient proffers. The applicant and the board agreed to postpone the decision until the meeting on December the 9th and keep the public hearing open. Fourth was a public hearing on rezoning 08-15 McCann Office Park to rezone 155 acres with 43 acres to be rezoned from RA to RA district with proffers, 6 acres from RA to B2, and then almost 12 acres from RA to M1, and 93 acres from RA to OM. No one spoke at the public hearing, and the rezoning was unanimously approved. Fifth one was at the next public hearing was on an ordinance amendment to the Frederick County Code, Chapter 165, to include self-storage facilities as a conditional use in RA areas. There were no public comments, and following discussion by the board members and on motion, the board voted not to approve the proposed change to the ordinance. Then there was a public hearing regarding ordinance amendment to the county code related to the Board of Zoning Appeals to bring the ordinance into conformity with changes in the state code. There were no public comments, and the board unanimously approved the change to the ordinance. The last and final public hearing that night was an ordinance amendment to the Frederick County Code, again, Chapter 165, to revise the setback from parcels of 6 acres or less within agricultural and forestal districts. Following public comments, it was passed unanimously. The other item was, for consideration, was the inclusion of 35 parcels of less than 5 acres into the agricultural and forestal districts, which had previously been postponed. The board approved including those properties in the ag and forestal district. Would like to add one more thing, and this is a personal comment. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, but I'm sure my sentiments are shared by most of the board members. We all know that this is, I guess, is Eric's last meeting, and I just personally want to say what a big help Eric has been to me in my time on the board and my serving as liaison, and I'm certainly going to miss him and wish him well, and as I say, he's been a big help to me, and I want to offer my personal thanks in this forum tonight, Eric.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. This is the spot on our agenda I'm sorry.
Last night with Sanitation Department. You want to report on?
Did you? Thank you, sir.
Sanitation Department met last night, and I've got a report on it. The total customer base for water is 14,525. Sanitary side is 14,035. Rainfall for the month of September was 3.8 inches, and that was up about an inch from last month, which is real good.
Are you going right home after this?
Thank you. I apologize.
Pardon me?
I said I apologize, sir.
That's cool.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the time on our agenda. It's okay.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
Yes,
something.
when it is that we offer time for the citizens to speak to us on anything, with the exception of the public hearings that are on the agenda. And if you have an item that you'd like to discuss or an idea, we'd be happy to hear from you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? So then we will close the citizen comment portion. Our public hearing deals with rezoning 10-15 Heritage Commons LLC, submitted by Greenway Engineering to rezone 96.28 acres from B2 Business General District to R4 Residential Planned Community District, 54 acres from RP Residential Performance District to R4 Residential Planned Community District, and .31 acres from the RA Rural Areas District to the R4 Residential Planned Community District with proffers. The properties are located west of the intersection of Front Royal Pike, Route 522, and Airport Road, Route 645, and are identified in the property identification number 63-A-150. 64-A-10 and 64-A-12 in the Shawnee Magisterial District. Mr. Ruddy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. We're going to take a little time to go through this rezoning application this evening. I'll start with an overview of the project and get into some of the discussion on the issues. Turn it over to Mr. Bishop, who will get into the transportation, and they'll conclude with Mr. Wyatt with a presentation on behalf of the applicant this evening. As you mentioned, it's a total of 150 acres that the applicant is looking to rezone to the R4 Residential Planned Community District. This particular application is substantially different from the one that you saw within the past year. Located within the Shawnee District, on the screen to your left, you can see the properties for which the rezoning is this evening, and they're highlighted with a bold black line. As you noted, they are to the east of Interstate 81, to the west of Airport Road. In essence, the extension of Airport Road would run right through this property and potentially connect, of course, over to the city of Winchester via Tevis Street and a future bridge. Recognizing the existing zoning on the property and the surrounding zoning, this location map gives you some indication, again, of what the surrounding zoning for the property is. The final location map that we have in front of us here, again, highlights the properties, but also includes the existing land use that is proposed with the 2030 Comprehensive Plan and the Sensney Eastern Frederick Land Use Plan. The hatching indicates that it is predominantly employment and commercial in nature in those areas north of Bufflick Run. and the areas to the south of Buffalo Run being a higher density residential. That's consistent with, again, the current land use plan and the previous rezoning for the property. As I mentioned, this is a request to rezone to the R4 district, which is a residential planned community. The rezoning request includes a proffer statement and, as is customary with the R4 district, a variety of modifications that are part of the proffer statement, again, to get it some more of a planned, innovative project. The actual request itself would enable 645 residential units. It would also enable commercial land uses. When we look at the 645 residential units that the applicant is proposing, they would be made up of multifamily residential units and multifamily residential combined potentially with commercial structures in a mixed structure environment. Gives you some overview of the proposed land use within this particular request. As I noted, the R4 enables a mix of uses, and it enables the applicant to modify the ordinance to an envisioned development, to something a little bit different than the straight RP and B2. It seeks to enable innovative design. In addition, when we look at the R4, there's a statement in the intent to make sure that special care is taken to ensure that necessary facilities, roads, and improvements are available or provided in support of the R4 development. Again, both of those are from the intent of the R4 planned district. To get into this particular request a little bit more, in an effort to provide a slightly different type of residential project, the applicant has included 12 zoning ordinance modifications within their modification document for this rezoning request. They've also proffered a land use matrix which seeks to further clarify the balance of land uses within each land bay. They also have included a generalized development plan which illustrates those land bays. 3 very key components, if you will, of this rezoning request. And to go through each of those here over the next several slides, the generalized development plan is on the screen to your left and, of course, is part of your agenda, which includes 3 distinct land bays. Land Bay 1 to the north, Land Bay 2 kind of in the center of the project north of Buffalo Road, and Land Bay 3 to the side, to the southern portion of the property south of Buffalo Run. When we look at those different land bays, again, I mentioned that they're on the land use matrix, also in the proffers, which identifies, again, the land use makeup of each of the bays. Land Bay 1 is solely commercial, 100% commercial. Land Bay 2, south of Airport Road and north of Buffalo Run, about 46 acres, is predominantly residential, 75 to 80% residential. Therefore, the remainder, 20 to 25%, may be commercial. So there we have a mix, but predominantly residential. Land Bay 3, which is south of Buffalo Run, about 53 acres in size, is predominantly commercial, 80 to 100% commercial. The remainder, the balance, which could be nothing up to 20% of residential land uses. And of course, also identified on the land use plan, on the generalized development plan and in the matrix, is the open space environment that was associated with Buffalo Run, about 12.35 acres in size. Moving on, I'm not going to go into every single modification that is being requested, but I have them listed, and I'll just go through them by title, if I may, to make sure that it's recognized that these zoning ordinance modifications that have been requested are included in the applicant's proffer statement. First modification deals with a proffered master development plan and the rezoning procedure. A master plan would be forthcoming, but not as part of this rezoning request. The applicant's generalized development plan seeks to serve that purpose. That's the first modification they're requesting. Modification number 2 deals with the permitted uses. Number 3, the mixture of housing types required. Number 4, the residential density. Modification number 5 deals with the commercial and industrial areas. Modification number 6 deals with the open space. Number 7, buffers and screening. Number 8, road access. Modification number 9, the phasing of the project. Modification number 10, the height limitations, including dimensional and intensity requirements with the permitted uses. Modification number 11 deals with the multifamily residential buildings. And the final modification, number 12, deals with the modified apartment complex building. Again, if you need any more details about those, we'd be happy to go into those a little bit later in the discussion. So I mentioned the applicant's generalized development plan is proffered, the land use matrix is proffered, the modifications are proffered. In addition to those, the applicant has attempted to address the capital facility impacts. Now, the applicant has proposed an alternative approach, and ultimately the county would have to deem if that's appropriate. The applicant's also proffered transportation improvements with this project that seek to address the county's transportation improvements that have been identified in this area. Again, in this case, the county would have to determine if the approach, the revenue sharing approach, is the appropriate one in this case too. The proffer statement also includes recreational amenities, trails throughout the, throughout the project, and a phasing program which deals with the number of units and the commercial phasing as it comes online. So that's what the applicant has proffered and committed to. More detail, obviously, are in the agenda, and we can go into those too as needed. Understanding what the applicant has come forward and requested of the county through this rezoning request, our evaluation has identified some points that we want to consider as the Planning Commission looks at the request. First and foremost, we'll start with the land use. As noted, while the comprehensive plan calls for a higher density residential in this general area and includes commercial and employment uses, we should recognize that there's a discrepancy with the actual location internal to this project compared with what the comprehensive plan calls for. The area to the south of Buffalo Run is called for the higher density residential. Of course, Land Bay 3 is proposed to be predominantly commercial. The employment and commercial land uses in and around the north and south sides of Airport Road, of course, so recognized. But we also know that there's additional residential land uses proposed within Land Bay 2. Moving from that land use question, we would then look at the impacts associated with this request and take a moment here to focus on the fiscal impacts, in particular those to the county's community facilities. So in the request current format, the applicant proposes the development of 645 multifamily residential dwellings, and in a phased approach would enable a minimum of 107,500 square feet of commercial land uses. Now, we know that residential land uses typically have a negative fiscal impact on community facilities. We'll go into some of the credits that the applicant is seeking here in a moment. But through the evaluation of this request, it's recognized with the school's evaluation that 165 students would be theoretically generated by this project when we look at the county's development impact numbers and the model that is used. That's approximately $6.6 million in capital cost on schools. Again, that was identified through the discussion with Frederick County Public Schools. The applicants recognize that there is an impact to schools, but they're also proposing within their project that the residential units will be market rate. This discussion was a much more detailed discussion during previous rezoning requests, but the market rate apartment and some definition to that end is indeed within the proffer statement. Now, the applicant's proposed approach is a little bit of an alternative in addressing the credits, and it's illustrated in proffer E of your proffer statement. And that is where the applicant, rather than the customary approach perhaps of at the time of building permit and more recently at the time of occupancy permit, proffering a particular amount of money to community facilities, this involves working with the school board to identify at certain thresholds the number of students that may be within these residential units. On an annual basis, I think it's finally been determined that that would be the approach that would be taken when the schools go forth and actually do their counts for number of students generated in particular areas. The applicant has also, as part of this, proffered $3,000 per unit. Now, it's important to recognize that that $3,000 is only for the units that are above a certain threshold, above 15, if you will, in the first phase, 3,000. So we recognize that if the project doesn't generate any students, then of course no impacts will be paid. So there's also a mechanism that's been provided that puts the county in the position of monitoring a bond, letter of credit, if you will, an escrow account, I think is the way it's termed, that would ensure that that money is available at each time it's checked. So again, a different approach, and ultimately the county has to determine if that's appropriate. Currently, when we look at the development impact model, current board policy recognizes that the development impact model illustrates what those impacts may be, and with the residential development, the applicant fully addresses those impacts. And as it's currently implemented, no credit is given for the commercial land uses, though it's recognized that commercial land uses do have a beneficial impact on county's tax revenue. So with the current development impact model, schools are of course just one component, but there are other components. And this particular request addresses the school, but doesn't directly address the other community facility providers. As noted, $13,880 per unit is the current county's development impact model number for multifamily buildings, multifamily units. As I mentioned, through this, the applicant has proposed a different approach to address the community facility impacts, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but I did want to recognize that it's a somewhat different approach, and that in addition to other credits, obviously the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors will have a decision to make as to if that's appropriate or not. At this point, as we've gone through land use and looked at the community facility impacts, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bishop, who can just touch base on some of the transportation elements of this request.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Jump right into it. From a transportation perspective, there are really 5 key components that we deal with based on what is currently on the books and what we're trying to work through with the proposal that was somewhat recently declined and then this new proposal. So basically, those 5 items are as follows. You have $1 million cash proffer, Warrior Drive, Airport Road, Interstate 81 Bridge, and Tevis Street. So in quick summary, what's currently on the books does all of these things. The proposal you have before you tonight does not do the $1 million cash proffer. It offers right-of-way only for Warrior Drive and Tevis Street to the north toward the Glaze property and the church property. And it fully constructs Airport Road and the I-81 Bridge. Now, you may recall at the previous attempt at a rezoning, I was very adamant that the language was just not there to actually guarantee you that revenue sharing agreement and everything. That has actually been cleaned up much better. Yes, we're only talking about Airport Road and the bridge. However, the language, in my opinion, is fairly tight regarding the guarantee of entrance into that agreement and allowing the county to move forward with those revenue sharing dollars. Now, I do know that you recently got some comments from Mr. Williams that had some issues with the language in G2 and G3, specific to what I'm referencing. However, I think I'll defer to Mr. Wyatt and, of course, Mr. Williams, that can be fairly easily cleaned up and clarified. But moving on from that, if I could speak for a moment about the reality of the current proffers on the property. Because one thing that has come up with me as I've talked with numerous board members and planning commissioners, and the applicant too, for that matter, is why do we keep harping on Russell 150? Why do we keep harping on what that package was, what that development was? Because we're in a different time, we're in a different place. I don't like to keep harping on it either. I'm somewhat handcuffed to it, though, because that's what's on the books, and I am obligated to point out the differences. It doesn't mean I'm saying it has to be this or it has to be that, but I'm obligated to point out the differences so that you know exactly what it is you're doing. Now, moving on from that, revenue sharing has been mentioned numerous times throughout the course of this process. I will reiterate, as we have to you before, we do have $8.7 million in revenue sharing funds dedicated to not just these roadways, but that northern Y, that Emberley to the north, and Tevis to the north, across Glaze and out to 522. That money remains in place. There was some fear that some of that was going to go away. Our CTB member has seen to it that that's not happening for the time being. That's not on the list for deallocation. So we're still whole in terms of that money and able to move forward once we have an agreement in place and a partner. As regards this proffer package and the comprehensive plan, items that are not addressed beyond right-of-way, to reiterate, Warrior Drive construction, Tevis extension construction. I've been asked numerous times also, does that balance out? Is that okay? I don't have the answer for that. I'd like to, but I don't. It's frankly going to be a judgment call to determine how badly we'd like the bridge and Airport Road. That is an important road to us. They have done a good job in laying out their commitment to that. However, to be able to do that, it appears that some other things may have to fall off the table, and that's where your leadership comes in. I'd like to be able to tell you this is right or that's right. No, we're not fully meeting the comprehensive plan. However, we've had a lot of discussions about where we are and where we were and all that sort of thing. So moving on from that to the transportation credit discussion. It's my understanding that there's some discussion of credits in the proffer. I've already pointed out what's in the comprehensive plan versus what's proffered. Now, one thing that's in the comprehensive plan that is less than what is proffered is the comprehensive plan calls for 2 lanes on Airport Road versus 4 lanes which are being proffered. However, if you go back to the original TIA, 4 lanes is justified based on that TIA. VDOT subdivision street acceptance standards, if you're going through a rezoning process and you're considering less than 4 lanes for a roadway that's got expected to have more than 8,000 trips, VDOT is very clear they don't want you coming back to them for that other 2 lanes for quite a while. Plus, on top of that, we have revenue sharing for half the roadway. The purpose of that program is to give credit toward impacts that are being offset in excess of the actual impacts of the development. With more study, that might be there. I'm not in a position to be able to say that's there or not there with these, but that's what you're looking at in terms of all the components of that right now. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, and of course, as he wraps up, we'll be able to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So here we are at having looked at the general issues and got into a little bit more detail. We're certainly available to answer any questions that the Commission would have. But in summary, when we look at from the land use side of it, we recognize that the land use proposed with the rezoning request is not wholly consistent with what is identified in the Senseney Eastern Frederick Land Use Plan. In addition, we've pointed out that there are negative impacts associated with the request when we look at the residential land uses. The applicant's approach to addressing those obviously is something that needs to be considered by the county, in particular the approach working with the school board and the credits that are being proposed through the transportation components. On the face of it, we recognize that there are negative transportation and fiscal impacts. John mentioned the transportation, and I've hit on the fiscal ones at this point. We're seeking action tonight at some point from the Planning Commission, after a public hearing, of course, and that action should also include the design modification requests. Up to the Planning Commission if you want to include those as a whole or deal with those individually. It's certainly the prerogative of the Planning Commission. I will point out that when this request came on in, the applicant had done a very thorough job with a comment review letter identifying his responses to all of the comments that were provided. We encouraged the applicant after the submittal to continue to work with the individual agencies to wrap up their comments and concerns. I believe the ones that we've received, we've forwarded to the Planning Commission digitally. I certainly made a copy of those again, and they're on your dais here this evening. And as Mr. Bishop mentioned, we have a comment this afternoon from Mr. Williams that deals with the legality side of things. And I believe that those points are certainly able to be addressed as we go through this process. With that, I turn it over to Mr. Wyatt, who's representing the Heritage Commons rezoning application. Yes, sir.
Do we get to ask questions before you turn it over to Evan?
Feel free.
Most of my questions are probably from Mr. Bishop.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Have you had an opportunity to review the transportation credits that were requested in this submittal, the dollar figures?
Yes.
Are they consistent with what you think reality is? Do you think they're high, low, in the ballpark?
I think they're high when you consider revenue sharing and everything else we've done for the roadway. Their own TIA said that they need the accesses that they're having. Now, the roadways that they're committing to do offset those impacts as we get into talking about Warrior Tevis. But in terms of once we put half the money in for those roadways, I can't deny that there's regional benefit. However, those were also the roadways that were needed just to do the development. So it becomes very nebulous in terms of saying, well, exactly this much should be a credit because those were roadways they were going to need anyway.
Dollars they used for square foot costs, how do you think they worked out? Were they consistent with those? You might disagree with the amount of square feet, but when they were putting in the actual unit costs for different features of work, would you agree with those dollar figures for the unit costs?
To be honest, I didn't get deeply into those. I usually punt those things to VDOT, but nothing jumped off the page.
Now, we've been working Warrior Drive for 30 years, I think.
Yes, we have.
A lot of it's been done, or some of it's been done, not a lot. But when we look at this development going south, what is the time frame do you think that it would be reasonable that Warrior Drive would be a usable road from this development south to where Warrior Drive is now?
In terms of a full connection to where you can drive from here all the way to Stevens City,
Or even going 5 miles south of where this development is?
it's really difficult to say without knowing what those landowners want to do. I mean, I could spit out a number, but it would be completely disingenuous because it would be just a made-up number. It's so difficult to predict development patterns. And that is how we build these comp plan roads is we wait for the developers to come in. We don't go out and condemn their property for the most part. So I can say that in the 10 years I've been here, I'm not aware of those particular impacted properties focusing now between their development and Paper Mill Road coming in with interest. So based on that, it could easily be another 10 or another 20 years. That's sort of the nature of what we're doing. Look at Route 37, it's a very similar sort of exercise. So that's impossible to predict. I would note that in terms of this development, their original TIA did not rely on Warrior Drive, frankly, or Tevis to the north because they weren't able to complete those things, though they did provide their portions of them in recognition of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah. And I understand we want to get Warrior Drive, but we're getting the right-of-way
Yes.
instead of building a road to nowhere that we have for 20 years and have to maintain for 20 years. Maybe the right-of-way is a appropriate compromise.
It's not nothing.
That's all.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, Mr. Unger.
I did have one question I guess I didn't understand. Is the bridge going across 81, is that a 2-lane or 4-lane?
4 lanes,
And it's going to be a 2-lane from 522 back to there, is that what I understood?
4 lanes.
4 lanes there too?
Comp plan calls for 2 on Airport Road. What is proffered is 4,
Okay.
which is consistent with what's required under the TIA.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Evan White with Greenway Engineering, representing the Heritage Commons Group in this rezoning application. I want to be thorough, but I want to not be redundant, so I'll try to work that in the best I can. But you heard the staff report, and my takeaway when I reviewed it and what I listened to this evening is there's three general matters that they're really asking you to think about and weigh in on. The first one is the land use conformity to the comprehensive plan. And we would agree with staff in their staff report that the commercial and higher density residential uses are supported in this general area of the county and of the plan. When you saw the beginning of Mike's presentation, he was showing you different looks, and he showed you the original rezoning that was approved in 2005. He showed you then the land use plan, which pretty much mirrored what was proffered. So the takeaway is when the land use plan was developed, because that was a rezoned proffered GDP, the county logically took what was on the books and continued that thought moving forward. When we took a look at this project, though, one of the things that we recognize that the county's been really working towards, certainly in the early 2000s, but definitely since then with a lot of the comp plan work, is the idea of integrated mixed use for commercial and residential projects and for communities. And we know that that's a primary goal of the comprehensive plan. And so the GDP that we have, of course, one of the things that we have tried to do, since this is going to be a primary regional road route, is we've attempted to go ahead and take from what used to be isolated residential on this side of the ravine and to try to blend it and to mix it into this portion of the community. I think you would all agree that having the residential and commercial within close proximity and with direct access to the regional road system makes a lot more sense from a planning perspective. What you also saw was the acreage breakdown in the land use matrix table. I'm not going to get into specific acreages and numbers, but the takeaway is if you look at the acreage, it's basically 2/3 commercial and 1/3 residential. The other thing that is different with this potential land use program is the ability to go ahead and utilize structures that could be both residential and commercial, which is a concept I know that the county's been moving towards as well. So really for the land use conformity, we actually think that with what the county's been working towards over the years, that this GDP, it definitely provides for the mixed-use community with direct access to the primary regional road system. It also creates the opportunity for a mixing of land uses, which by default creates walkable community opportunities, which you otherwise would not have. We talked about Warrior Drive, and Roger brought up some items about costing just a few minutes ago. And one of the things that we have attempted to do with this project, of course, the proffer provides the commitment for the local funding match for the revenue sharing program that John had mentioned. And what we've agreed to do, maybe go back to this, is to provide the local funding match, which is inclusive of the bridge crossing over Interstate 81, the section of East Tevis Street through here, the dual lane roundabout, and then a 4-lane section that gets this. So in essence, what we've done is we've delivered a proffer that gets the regional road system connectivity in place that's going to allow traffic to move back and forth between South Pleasant Valley Road and 522, which is a very significant project. One of the things I think that's getting lost in the shuffle, though, is the fact that because our proffer does commit for the local funding match, and it does commit for the developers to execute a revenue sharing agreement with the county within 30 days of final non-appealable rezoning. The thing that I think is not being mentioned is the fact that they're doing a cash outlay of in the area of $5 million based on the county engineering consulting engineer estimates on a 30% design. And you know, I've worked on large projects in the community before, and you may recall projects such as Willow Run, such as Snowden Bridge, Stevenson Village back in the day. And generally what happens is with these regional road improvement projects, the developer proffers to build sections of the road as the development plan progresses. So with Willow Run as an example, The first phase took it from the city into the first phase of the project and entitled the developer to do 600 units before they had to start the second phase. The second phase went on, and then there was another opportunity for another 600 units, and then the final phase got it out to 37 at the end of the development program. So with a project like that, which is how it's normally done, you have an opportunity as a developer to build a section of road, sell properties, develop, bring in revenues, and continue moving on. I think what's been lost in this whole discussion is the fact that these guys are being asked to put up the entire dollar amount day one before they're entitled to any development. And I believe that is a very significant commitment that needs to be considered. As far as Warrior Drive, there's been some discussion about that. And I agree with John, it's very dangerous to try to stick a timeline on it. What we do know about Warrior Drive, though, and we've talked about this, is Warrior Drive has successfully been built pretty much from 277 at Sharando High School up through Wakeland Manor to this point in the community. What we also know with Warrior Drive is that there's a proffer commitment for the village at our trip, which has not been started and more than likely is going to need to be rethought before it can be started. But that would get Warrior Drive ultimately up to Cross Point and then to a connection at a new interchange at Route 37. But once you get north of 37 between here up to our property, there's a couple things that become painfully obvious. The first one, of course, is there is a land area right through here that is not within the county's comprehensive plan for development. It's not in the urban development, nor is it in the sewer and water service area. And as John said during his presentation, or I guess in response to a question, is the typical mode for getting road improvements built is you wait for the developer to come in and then you work through their process to try to get the road delivered. If you look at this section of land in here, and I know it's a little bit hard to see on here, but there's a lot of properties that are very small in size that are going to be very, very difficult to assemble. And in all likelihood, you're not going to see probably a development interest try to take this on and work to where you can actually get something. So I agree with the fact and the comment that Roger made that if Warrior Drive is built to the limits of our property, it is a road to nowhere for a very, very, very long time. What has given us really pause with the requirement for Warrior Drive or the thought about Warrior Drive is the fact that because of where it would go, VDOT will not qualify this in its current form as a revenue-sharing project. Obviously, the reason is because it does not provide connectivity from the regional road system to anything that it would connect to. With revenue-sharing funds being very competitive, I seriously doubt the Board of Supervisors would either endorse a project like this that just spend money to take a road to there. So the trick is with the developer, if they build it, of course, then there's an issue of being on an extremely long-term maintenance bond, which is inclusive of a bridge crossing of the ravine of Buffalo Run, and that's just not feasible either. So when we looked at this, what we recognized is that the best we can do at this point in time is provide the right-of-way for the Warrior Drive section, and then also to limit development opportunity in Land Bay 3 that's consistent with what the Village of Madison traffic study showed at their entrance until we have an opportunity to hopefully find a large enough user that then we can come back to the county, VDOT, and say, we have an opportunity, what do you think? And maybe everybody can think at that point in time. But right now, that's just not there. So the best we can do is provide the county with the right-of-way and limit development opportunity in that location. Once again, we talked about the county consulting engineering numbers. Another comment that staff had made was what I consider the third issue that they brought up in the staff report, which is the identification of fiscal credits for the property. As Mike said in his staff report, we are proffering to deliver 50,000 square feet of commercial by the 300th building permit for residential use, and then another 57,500 square feet by the 600th building permit. So what that means is before the project gets to residential build-out, there's going to be 107,500 square feet of commercial that's going to be delivered on the project site. Now, what we know is that the county's model has the ability to look at residential and commercial under the same development program. What we know is they can program it into the year in which it's anticipated to be built, and then the output module will demonstrate what the, if you will, what the real capital facilities impact would be based on that threshold of development. And I've given you two snapshots. It's a little bit hard to see, but this is a 300. This is 50,000 square feet of office, and it shows that it goes from 13,880 down to just a little over 7,000. Conversely, later on in the development program, which is a further year look, year 8, if you will, when there's an additional 57,500 square feet built in conjunction, and this says 345, it's actually 300, so it should be a little bit better, but nonetheless, it shows that it's reduced down to about $6,600 per unit. So, you know, once again, what we tried to do with this particular approach is to utilize county numbers and county values to demonstrate our point. So these aren't assumptions we're making, they're numbers that come from the county. With that said, we had done this matrix table, and we ran down everything, and at the conclusion of it, it demonstrated with what we were providing for the regional transportation program that we would otherwise not be building if those things weren't on our property, and then coupled with some value for right-of-way dedication and some other items, we demonstrated that we were about $2.7 million above what a residential-only project would be at 13,880. Now, as we talked through that, of course, there were a couple comments that were made, and so I took them seriously, like I've done everything else with this project, and we went back and we looked at it. And one of the things, maybe I can do this and help, but what we've done is this would be a residential-only value. What we did was we took the values from the development impact model based on the 300 and the 345, and what these say, this is what the total impact would be for this. So instead of 8.9, you're really at 4.4 with the proffered commercial that we're doing. And then when you go in and you look at the regional stuff, of course, we wouldn't be building interstate bridge. That's certainly not part of our project requirement. What we did with the dual lane roundabout, I actually reduced the county consulting engineer's numbers by $300,000 because if we were doing a major intersection on our project, that would be a budget for that. So we discounted it by $300,000 and we dropped the half of that. The airport road extended, as John said, it's a U2, there's revenue sharing. So what we did was instead of taking half of the value of that, we took a quarter value of the road section, and then right-of-way dedication for East Tevis Street only. And then I did note the fact that we're not taking value for Warrior Drive, but the Warrior Drive right-of-way, if we were doing the project for ours, in all likelihood, we would be required to do a two-lane section. So I took the right-of-way value, instead of, we assumed a 60-foot right-of-way would be what would normally be required for a two-lane section. We bumped it up to the 103-foot and took the 43-foot times the square foot to get that. But we did not count that. But the easy thing to see is with the development impact model, it says that's where we are impact-wise. With the transportation stuff, we're there. Then we have a couple other allowances for hiker-biker, which Parks and Rec had said public facilities would count, and of course the student escrow. And when you do the math very simply, we're still cash positive. So even with a refinement of that, we feel pretty good about it. So what I want to do now is really just get back to what we're doing. So what are we doing? We are doing a project, and the project is providing, as Mike said, 3 distinct land bays. It's mixing uses. It's limiting residential to 645. It's proffering a phasing plan for the residential, so it'll take a minimum of 8 years for those 645 units to be realized. It's providing commercial along the way. It's providing disclosures for the residential in the sales literature, the deeds, and the leases to identify the Winchester Regional Airport proximity. It's providing the recreational amenity packages and the public trail systems. It's providing the school escrow account that's being held by the county. One thing I do want to bring up there, because I saw it in the slide when Mike did his presentation, it did show, of course, what the schools would project, which is 165 students. And that is the number they have to use. They can't assign a number based on a value of a unit. So it doesn't matter what the bedrooms are. It doesn't matter the price point of the unit. They have to run a number. It says 165. But the one thing I want to make sure is clear, the slide showed that with the $3,000 per student escrow account, that for 0 through 50 students, there would not be a payment, and that's actually not true. The way the proffer is written is it goes through the development program, and for example, the first phase says at 175 units, they will do a count when they do their annual count. And then if there's more than 15 students in the project at that point in time, every student over 15, there's a $3,000 payment. So theoretically, if the schools are right and we're wrong, there would be, at that phase of development, 15 times 3,000 payment. You don't wait till you get past 50 and then count. That's not how the proffer is written. Another comment I wanted to mention is that with the Land Bay 3, you may recall that there are 2 small commercial properties right here. And when the Madison Village did their rezoning, there was an access connectivity through there. When we worked on the original rezoning back in 2005, there was a concern that because of this being RP and this being B2, that there would be a buffer imposed on the B2 user. What the developer at that point in time said was that whatever the buffer requirement was, it would be borne completely on this property. And that commitment's still there when there's a master plan that's being done for this, because if it's R4, there could potentially still be a buffer requirement there. It would still be completely on the Heritage Commons property. As far as the transportation program, of course, dedicating all the right-of-ways within the project, executing the revenue sharing agreement within 30 days of final non-appealable zoning approval. We are prohibiting development activity on the property until the executed agreements are there with the county. Providing the local matches for everything that you see, which is identified as Section A and Section B. And then limiting the initial development within the project to be served by Section A to the 175 multifamily and 50,000 square feet of commercial until construction commences on the Section B improvements. Now, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to identify another comment. As Mike said, that he had received information from the county attorney this afternoon, and there was a question regarding G2 and G3, the last sentences. To me, it is clear. If there's a better way to word it, we'll certainly be happy to think about it. But G2 says that John wanted a revenue sharing agreement that was inclusive of sections A and B. He wanted it under one agreement, and that's what the proffer says. And the proffer says we cannot do any development on the property until that agreement is in place for A and B, okay? And then at the last sentence of section G3, it says that the developer has to stop development at that certain level until construction commences on the section B improvements. Now, just so that it's not muddied, G2 is specifically for executing the agreement. G3 is talking about construction of roads. What's going to happen is, once the project is approved, the county engineer is going to allow the consulting engineer to restart the design of the Section B improvements, which is the bridge, the dual lane roundabout, and the section here out to 522. So we don't lose time, the developers are going to go ahead and facilitate the design of Section A. So in a perfect world, the design plans for A and B are all generally approved by VDOT at about the same time. Now, because the county's managing this, the county has to let the construction bids for both projects. What's going to happen, obviously, Section A is going to be an easier section to bid. It's going to be an easier section to build. Section B is going to be a little bit more difficult because it's a bridge crossing of Interstate 81. So what we've done is we've said we need to get started, but we're willing to stop until there's a construction of the bridge and the Section B improvements. And the purpose of that is because we want to make sure that the complete road network is in place. We don't want people saying, well, you're just trying to bait and switch to build Section A and not do anything else. We're committed to both sections in 30 days through the revenue sharing agreement commitment, through the local match agreement that they're putting the money up. It's just the construction cycles are a little different. So that's the only difference there. So we had a couple of agency comments that had come in. I just spoke about the one from the county attorney. The other comment he mentioned was that it wasn't clear how we were going to calculate if a residential and commercial project was in the same structure. Do you deduct that from the commercial acreage? Do you deduct it from the residential acreage? It's a good question. And what we're going to do on the master plan, we'll put a narrative on there that basically says this: whatever the site area is for the commercial and residential facility, we'll look at the building, we'll see what percentage is of residential, what percentage is of commercial, and we'll discount both accordingly by acreage. So that seems to be the best way to do that. We also received a comment from the Frederick County Sanitation Authority last Friday. There was a couple things they mentioned. First, they want to make sure we're aware that the sewer conveyance system for getting treatment from this facility to Opequon is at or near capacity in some instances and could be problematic, and that there's a study going on that may reroute effluent from this general area of the county to Parkins Mill. We recognize that if we start development and we're going to Opequon and there's a pump station that has to be upgraded to accommodate our flows, that's how development works. So we'll have to deal with that. The other comment that they made was they would like to see about the opportunity for a test well for water production on the property. They mentioned a large aquifer, I'm assuming it has with Buffalo Run. We are not, at this point in time, knowledgeable enough to really even speak to that and what it means. We don't know the ramifications. It's like anything like this that's complicated. The devil's in the details. What are the agreements? What are the requirements? What are the pitfalls? What are the benefits? If it works out to be a win-win, then fine. If it's not, then we wouldn't agree to it. And we would also want to make sure that the board was comfortable with economic development properties, giving up economic development land for test wells. The aquifer, of course, is fairly large. It seems like there's rural area properties in and around that may be better suited, but we're not going to rule out the opportunity to sit down and talk to FCSA. After the rezoning, when we do the master plan, we can sit down and find out the finer points of it. And if it makes sense for both parties, then, okay, but if it doesn't, then we're not going to agree to something. And then the final comment, we received a comment from Frederick County Public Schools. The proffer about the cash escrow, the way it was written was that once we hit the 175 unit, as an example, there was a count that had to be done within 90 days, and then payment would be made accordingly. Now, we actually did that to prove to them that we were going to pay as quickly as practical. It actually created a burden for them because they do their accounts annually. So what we agreed to do was to rewrite the proffer and We did not, of course, have a chance to get this rewritten and submitted to you guys with a new owner's signature in time for this meeting. But we are standing here tonight to tell you we are committed to doing this, and it will be included in the proffer that goes to the board, and it will have an updated owner's signature on it. The public schools have weighed in and said this new language makes them more comfortable, and they're accepting of this language in order to do the counts. So that's really it for my staff report. In the conclusion, we have a development program that we believe truly provides for mixed use, truly provides for regional improvements, ensures that development will occur timely through our phasing program. Once again, the commitments for revenue sharing are there, they're real, and they're pretty significant day one. Of course, the project delivers what we've been trying to achieve in this community, which is the bridge crossing and the connectivity so we can get traffic away from 313 and down through South Pleasant Valley Road a different way. We have done design activities for Regional Road that would be started immediately after rezoning approval. And speaking for Matt and Bruce, I can tell you that they're extremely excited to get this project moving forward. And they certainly hope you feel the same way, and we request your recommendation for approval this evening. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions of Mr. Wyatt? Yes. Mr. Thomas?
Just to clarify again in my own mind, on the bridge, the way the revenue sharing agreement is written, if the estimate is incorrect and the cost comes in higher, or if there's an unforeseen cost overrun due to change of conditions, unforeseen conditions in the foundations or something like that, the developer's on the hook for all the additional cost.
The way the county managed revenue sharing agreements are structured is, here's the dollar amounts that we have available from VDOT. You are required to be the local match. Should there be unforeseen circumstances, or if it costs more than what we budgeted, the developer has to increase the local match. It's not something we go back to VDOT and say we need more money because there's no more money to go get.
Anyone else have a question, Mr. Wyatt? Yes, Mr. Unger.
A couple of comments. It sounds like to me with that, the way you said that, then if it comes in lower, then you would put up the lesser amount than what they're putting up.
I'll be surprised if the bridge comes in at the cost estimate it's at.
Another comment, and you're going to be seeing it more and more, and I wish it could be accomplished here. Sanitation Department is looking for places to find water in Frederick County, and if that could be accomplished here and it would work, it certainly would be a blessing.
And once again, we're not shutting out the opportunity to have that discussion. I can't 3 days before a rezoning public hearing with no knowledge of what it means, commit to it in a proffer.
Anyone else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Would anyone in the audience like to speak to us about this rezoning? Anyone? If you'll come forward to the mic. Yes, sir. If you'll give us your name and magisterial district, please.
My name is Mike Shepard. I live in the Shawnee Magisterial District, and I own the property directly to the south. The small little B2 properties at front 522. As Evan mentioned, the devil's in the details, and I'm just trying to clarify the details because I'm not so sure that, in talking to staff and in hearing what I heard tonight, I'm a little confused, and I'm not sure that I'm certain about this setback or what buffer that's needed between my business property and their Land Bay 3, which could be residential. So I guess I just have a question. I don't know if I can directly ask Evan or staff. I'm getting different answers that the proffer's not there and that it is there to accommodate for the setback against my property.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Anyone? Well, seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just make one comment in response to what we heard there, and to recognize that the property that Mr. Shepherd owns is right on 522. It is zone B2, and of course it was adjacent to the original Russell 150 project and adjacent to Madison Village. During the Russell 150 project, it was zoned RP adjacent to it, and therefore it was B2 to RP, so it created some potential issues with buffers and screening. The applicant, the Russell 150 project at that time, coordinated with Mr. Shepherd and modified their buffer so it didn't impact his B2 property. Again, the Land Bay 3, predominantly commercial in the land use matrix, potential for some residential. It's the R4 district against the B2. Mr. White may want to provide some additional clarification as to what they're thinking of in that particular location, because again, it's pretty much a wide open land bay at this point.
Mr. White?
I think to make sure Mike Shepherd, not Mike Ruddy, but Mike Shepherd feels comfortable, the bottom line is if there is a zoning imposed buffer between his property and our property because it became a residential frontage, as an example, what we are saying is, instead of him providing a buffer when he develops and us providing a buffer, the county has a mechanism called a common shared buffer and screening easement agreement. And what we would do would be we would provide that where the complete distance of the buffer would be on our property. Mike's properties are too small to be imposing buffer distances on his tract, to be perfectly honest with you. That was the discussion that we had back when the 2005 project was approved, and here we are 10 years later, and it hasn't changed. We will be doing an amendment, as I said, to address the tweaking for the public school language. As I said, we were going to put it on the master plan. If it makes everybody feel comfortable, we can add language that a common shared buffer and screening easement, if required, would be borne on Land Bay 3 in its entirety.
That's right. Good. Thank you so much. All righty. It seems that we're ready for a discussion and thoughts and a lot of information. Oh, go ahead.
I think this is a significantly improved project over what we saw before. I think there was a number of us previously, when Russell 150 came in, were skeptical of all the financial commitments that the developer made, that he was actually going to be able to produce those commitments, because it didn't appear to be economically feasible, and it may have turned out that it wasn't economically feasible to do everything that he committed to. I think the bridge benefit over 81 is a significant item to consider. I expect the cost will be higher than what they're budgeting, but since they've committed to pay any overruns, I think that frees the county up there. I think Airport Road, that Section A being 4 lanes, will help ease the traffic in and out of there. I think that's going to be a major route for southern residents to come up 522 and go over into the backside of all the shopping areas that are over there, Walmart, Lowe's, and all those shopping areas. I disagreed with some of the credits Evan had put in previously, and I noticed that he's taken them out, but it still ends up being a positive with the credits. So I think that, I think that relieves my concern there. I think, Section D, I think it really would be unreasonable to build the road and the bridge at this point. We don't need a bridge to nowhere that somebody has to maintain. In the future, when there's a reason to have a bridge there, we have the right-of-way that it could be developed. I think this is a great compromise, a win-win for both the county residents, and the developer. And I think it's better than having an empty field sit there with construction debris sitting in the middle of the field. So I think I'm certainly in favor of this. I think it's a good benefit to the county, and I think it's a positive approach to getting this project accomplished.
Sir, thank you. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, I too am supportive of approval of this application. I think the developmental impacts have been mitigated, and I think the applicant is delivering major regional transportation improvements.
Thank you. Mr. Unger?
And the same way, I would support this project. this looks like a little 37 to me, and if we don't get it done, and, you know, you can run up down 81, you show me someplace else there's a bridge being built over 81, very much an accomplishment, and I'm very much for getting the traffic across town like that.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, I move for approval of rezoning application number 10-15, Heritage Commons.
Second.
The motion is to recommend approval of rezoning 1015 Heritage Commons LLC. Any other comments? Mr. Moan?
Moan, yes.
Dunlap, yes.
Triplett, yes.
Kenny, no.
Molden, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Oates, no.
Manuel, yes.
Ambrosi, yes.
Marston, yes.
Unger, yes.
And the chair votes yes. This will go to the Board of Supervisors on December the 9th. Thank you. We are at the end of our agenda, but we do have another subject that we'd like to ask John Bishop to help with, if you'd be so kind. At our meeting, well, basically, that dealt with the Woodbine property. There was discussion about, if you will, contributions made based on 75 cents rule. And I don't think there was anybody sitting here that knew what the 75-cent rule was. So, John, you're here to help us.
Madam Chair, would you like me to abstain from this?
That might be a good idea.
Madam Chair, we just had a little sidebar down here. We're just concerned with the last item to make sure that the modifications that were requested were actually acted on as a part of that recommendation of approval.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're good? All right, cool.
Thank you. So,
I'm glad you asked. To be blunt, there is no 75-cent rule. Something that sort of developed over time, not even that much time, really. It was born with the BPG rezoning on Route 11 North. You may recall that there were significant improvements off-site that were needed that they couldn't fully address. So they proffered 72 cents per square foot. However, in addition to that, they proffered a partial portion of the signal, potential future signal at Branson Springs Road. They did significant upgrades along the frontage of Route 11, all along the frontage of their property, which in that case is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 square foot, going off my memory. There's turn lanes and all that sort of thing as well as providing right-of-way for potential crossing, another crossing of 81 along the northern, should Branson Spring ever be extended over there. So that was the first recent example that got into a square foot transportation proffer. Now, please note, they also did significant other improvements. Now, when Blackburn was more recently coming through down off Apple Valley Road, now, frankly, that's a rezoning that came through with its hair on fire.
Yes.
You know, they had a user and a very short timeline within which to meet the needs of that user. And once again, they were going into a location that had significant off-site needs, which they really had no access to address. Route 11 in that area is in dire need of upgrade. Even the intersection at Apple Valley Road and Route 11, significant upgrades needed once again. So we sort of fell back to that most recent acceptable example, which in this case was the BPG rezoning. However, once again, they also had their own improvements to do in the form of Dawson Drive. Now, a lot of people are familiar with Dawson Drive because it serves American Woodmark and all that back there. What many people don't know, it's not in the system, and it didn't meet their property. There's quite a few things that they were going to have to do and are still in the process of doing. Bring that up to state standards, get it to their property, get it constructed, and actually accessed to Shady Elm Road. So on top of that, they did their square footage proposal. I believe somewhat as a staff responsibility, when we had sort of offered that BPG number as something for the Trex to consider as they were coming through with Blackburn property, we may have unintentionally started to set a precedent, even though it was unprecedented. We were trying to build a link between those two developments as opposed to develop a rule that would be put in place countywide. So then, of course, you had the more recent rezoning that came before you that talked about that square footage proffer. However, it didn't do anything else. So that was a really key difference between the precedent that had been set and what was being done. Now, I've been asked, since these things have happened, well, what about developing a number? That's a really slippery slope, frankly, because every building has different frontage. Every building is going to have those different baseline improvements, which they are fairly easily able to address. And I mean easily able to address, not in terms just of cost, but in terms of accessibility to right-of-way, ability to get out there and dig in. It's one thing to be able to get on the front of your property and just pull a building permit from VDOT, or to go build at an intersection where the right-of-way exists. It's quite another for a private individual to try and purchase right-of-way to offset impacts. And we've run into that many times before. But what you would end up getting into is a situation where you've got large developments that people feel like probably underpaid, and small developments that people feel like are vastly maybe overpaying. Now, I do think it's a worthwhile exercise for the Transportation Committee, perhaps, to take a look at not just these recent examples that talked about 72 or 75 cents, but look, cast a wider net, if you will. For example, Greystone. I personally believe that even with the revenue sharing and everything else that we have done with Greystone, if you applied their square footage to what those roadway improvements are actually costing, you would come up with a very large number per square foot, much larger than 75 cents, probably a lot closer to $2 or even $4. That might be high. I don't know. I haven't done the math. But I believe that would be a worthwhile study that would aid you in your discussion moving forward. But in terms of maybe a not-so-brief summary of how that 75 cents came to be, and maybe why you should be cautious to people who try and point to that as a rule. That is how that came about.
Thank you. Now we know what it is and that it's not a rule.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for doing that for us, John. All righty, I do believe we have a meeting in December. Thank you very much. And we're at the end of the agenda.
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much.